Parents gave my siblings $200K, excluded me. Then they begged for help after I became successful. Hey, I'm Michael, 27 years old. I guess you could say my whole life, I've been the one that got overlooked. I've got two siblings, my older sister Sarah and my younger brother Chris, and to say they were always the golden children is an understatement. It's like they could never do anything wrong in my parents' eyes. Meanwhile, I was just there, I guess. Growing up, Sarah was the perfect student, always getting straight A's, involved in all these school activities, and then she went off to some fancy Ivy League college. My parents were obsessed with it. I swear, from the day she got her acceptance letter, they couldn't stop talking about how proud they were. They threw her this big celebration party, invited all the family and friends. It was like we were having a second Christmas just for Sarah's academic success. Chris, on the other hand, didn't even need to try hard. Things just seemed to work out for him. He followed Sarah's footsteps and got into some fancy grad school program. My parents made sure everything was set up for him too. They covered his tuition, helped him move, got him a new laptop, you name it. And then there was me. I didn't get into any Ivy League school. I went to a state college. It was a good school, but I could feel that it wasn't something my parents would brag about like they did with Sarah and Chris. When I told them I'd gotten accepted, they kind of nodded and said something like, "That's great, Michael." But I could tell their hearts weren't really in it. No celebration, no party. I was lucky if we ordered takeout that night. I guess I tried not to let it bother me, but the older I got, the more I noticed just how different things were for me compared to them. It wasn't just the attention, it was the money too. Like Sarah's wedding? $200,000. No joke. My parents went all out. Venue, catering, the dress, everything. They treated it like the event of the century. I mean, they even flew some of our family in from out of state. For Chris, they paid for his entire graduate degree and helped him out with rent until he could get on his feet. Emily, the youngest, didn't even have to worry about student loans. They covered those too. But me? Well, when I was starting out in my career and needed some tools for work, stuff that was essential to even get going, I asked my parents for help. They gave me $7,000. Now, don't get me wrong, $7,000 is a lot of money. But when you compare it to $200,000 for a wedding or paying off someone's tuition in full, it kind of stings. It felt like I was getting the bare minimum just so they could say they helped. And it wasn't just the money either. It was how every time we got together as a family, I felt like the odd one out. At family dinners, all the conversations were about Sarah's fancy job or Chris's latest achievement. They'd sit there talking about their vacations, new house upgrades, or whatever expensive thing they were planning next. Meanwhile, I'd be sitting there, eating my food, trying to think of something to contribute to the conversation. But honestly, what was I going to say? Hey, I just finished a big project at work and I'm still paying off my car. It felt like my achievements were just kind of small potatoes compared to what they were doing. I remember this one dinner in particular, maybe like a year ago. We were all sitting around the table and the conversation turned, as it usually did, to Sarah's latest vacation plans. "Oh, we're going to Europe for a few weeks. It's just so nice that Mom and Dad are able to help out with the expenses," she said, casually sipping her drink like it was no big deal. Chris chimed in too, talking about some wedding expenses that were covered for him. "I don't know what we would have done without that $200,000, honestly," he said, all nonchalant. And then there was Emily, laughing about how glad she was that tuition hikes didn't affect her, thanks to our parents covering everything. I just sat there trying to focus on my plate, but it was like their words were drilling into my brain. It wasn't just the money. They had been handed their futures on a silver platter. Meanwhile, I had to claw my way up and take out loans to get by. Every dollar felt like a struggle, while they acted like they didn't even have to worry about it. And the worst part? No one even seemed to notice I wasn't part of the conversation. I could feel my frustration building. My face got hot, my hands were clenched under the table, and I couldn't keep it in anymore. So I muttered something under my breath. Must be nice. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. Sarah was the first to speak. "What's that supposed to mean, Michael?" She had this mix of confusion and annoyance on her face, like she couldn't even begin to understand why I was upset. I took a deep breath and tried to keep my cool, but it all just came out in a rush. "It means that not all of us get everything handed to us on a silver platter. Some of us actually have to work for what we need." I could tell they didn't get it. Chris just shrugged and leaned back in his chair like it was no big deal. "Michael, you're always acting like you're the victim," he said with that smirk of his. "Didn't Mom and Dad help you get those tools for work?" That hit a nerve. Sure, they gave me $7,000, but when I thought about everything they'd done for Sarah and Chris, it felt like crumbs. Yeah, they helped, but $7,000 compared to hundreds of thousands? It's not the same, and you know it. Mom tried to smooth things over as usual. Michael, we thought that's what you needed. We've always tried to give you what was fair. But how is $7,000 fair when you're handing out hundreds of thousands to the others? I couldn't keep the bitterness out of my voice. Fair? You think this is fair? You've given them everything. You've practically paved their roads for them. I've had to build mine brick by brick. The conversation spiraled from there, with everyone trying to defend themselves, trying to make it seem like I was just being dramatic. You're blowing this out of proportion, Dad said, shaking his head. We gave you what you needed. Needed? No. They gave me the bare minimum. That's the part that hurt the most. They didn't care about what I wanted, only what they thought was enough to keep me quiet. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor, and left the room without another word. Their voices trailed behind me as I walked out the door, but I didn't look back. I was done being the forgotten one, the one who always got the leftovers. When I stormed out of the house that night, I was fuming. I don't think I've ever been that mad. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest like it was trying to break free, and every step I took down the driveway, it felt like the world was closing in on me. I didn't even know where I was going. I just knew I needed to get away. Far away. It was late, probably close to 10 p.m., and the streets were quiet. You know that eerie kind of quiet where everything feels a bit too still? Yeah, that was it. The only sound was my shoes hitting the pavement as I walked. I didn't have my phone out or my headphones in. I wasn't in the mood for distractions. I needed to think. As I walked, the memories of that dinner replayed in my head on a loop. Chris's smug face, Sarah's condescending questions. It was like they were all living in this bubble of privilege and didn't even notice how suffocating it was for me. They were all in their happy little world, and I was just the outsider looking in. The more I thought about it, the more frustrated I got. I kept asking myself, why didn't I say more? Why didn't I really let them have it? But then I realized no matter what I said, it wouldn't have made a difference. It was like talking to a brick wall. They had their version of events, and I had mine, and there was no way those two things were ever going to match up. I ended up walking to this park that I used to hang out in when I was a kid. It wasn't far from the house, maybe a 15-minute walk. There was this old bench near the playground, kind of hidden in the corner by some trees. It was one of those places you go when you just need to get away from everything. And that's exactly what I needed. I sat down, leaning back against the cold wood, and just stared up at the sky. It was one of those clear nights where you could see all the stars. Normally I'd find it calming, but that night it didn't help. All I could think about was how unfair everything was. How I'd spent my whole life trying to measure up, only to be left with scraps while my siblings were given everything on a silver platter. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and for a second I debated not looking at it. But curiosity got the best of me, so I pulled it out. Of course, it was a text from Emily. Michael, where did you go? You need to come back. Let's talk about this. Talk. Yeah, right. I'd heard that before. Talking never fixed anything in my family. It was always the same old story. Mom and Dad explaining why things were the way they were, and me being told to just accept it. But this time, I wasn't in the mood for more excuses. I didn't respond to the text, just shoved my phone back in my pocket. I wasn't ready to deal with Emily, or any of them for that matter. I needed time to cool off and think things through. Sitting there, I started to go over everything in my head. The years of being overlooked, the moments when I felt like an afterthought. I mean, sure, I wasn't a perfect kid, but I didn't deserve to be treated like I was less important than the others. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about being seen, being valued. And for whatever reason, my parents had decided that my dreams, my needs, didn't matter as much as Sarah's or Chris's. I kicked a rock with my foot, watching it roll across the playground. I couldn't stay out there forever, even though the idea of never going back to that house was tempting. Eventually, I had to figure out what I was going to do. But for now, I just needed to be alone. I don't know how long I sat there, but after a while, the cold started to creep in. Fall was just around the corner, and the nights were getting chillier. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, feeling the wind cut through the thin fabric. I thought about heading home, but the idea of walking back into that house, facing them after everything that had happened, felt unbearable. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, considering whether or not to pick up. Part of me wanted to just ignore it, but another part of me thought, maybe she actually gets it this time. I hesitated for a few more seconds before finally swiping to answer. Michael, where are you? Emily's voice came through, calm but with that usual hint of superiority that always grated on my nerves. Doesn't matter, I replied, my voice flat. I'm not coming back tonight. Come on, you're being ridiculous. We're family. We need to talk this out, she said, like it was that simple. Talk? I let out a bitter laugh. You mean like we always do, where I get told why I should be grateful for what little I get, and you all pat yourselves on the back for being such great siblings? That's not fair, she shot back. We didn't know you felt like this. How could you not know? I said, my frustration rising again. Every time we sit down as a family, it's all about you, Sarah, and Chris. You get the trips, the houses, the weddings, and I get left with whatever's left over. I'm sick of pretending it doesn't bother me. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear her trying to come up with something to say, something that would make everything better, but nothing came. Look, maybe we haven't seen things from your perspective, Emily finally said, her voice softer. But running away like this isn't going to solve anything. This isn't about tonight, Emily, I said, rubbing my temples. This is about every time I've been left out, every time you guys got to live your best lives while I was stuck trying to make ends meet. I needed help too, and all I got was a toolbox. She didn't say anything for a while, and I could hear the faint sounds of the house in the background. Laughter, dishes clinking, like nothing had even happened, like I didn't matter. Just come back, she said eventually. We'll figure it out, okay? But I wasn't ready to figure anything out. Not with them. Not yet. I need time, I said, before hanging up and shoving my phone back in my pocket. I leaned back on the bench and stared at the stars again. It was going to take more than just a conversation to fix this. They didn't understand, and maybe they never would. But at least for tonight, I wasn't going to be the one sitting quietly, pretending everything was okay. I didn't sleep much that night after walking out of the park. When I got back to my apartment, my mind was still racing, and the weight of everything that happened sat heavy on my chest. I just lay there in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying the dinner over and over again. No matter how many times I went through it in my head, I couldn't figure out how it got to this point. How was it that my own family could be so blind to everything I'd been dealing with for years? I mean, I get it. They were busy with their own lives, but was it really that hard to see how unfair things had been? As the hours ticked by, I started thinking deeper about what had happened. Not just at dinner, but everything that led up to it. All the years of being left out, all the moments I'd brushed off as no big deal when really they had been building up. One on top of the other. I realized that this wasn't just some one-time thing. This had been going on for as long as I could remember. It wasn't just about the money. Sure, the financial stuff hurt, but it was more than that. It was about how I'd been treated, how I'd always been the one who had to fend for myself while they were being taken care of. I was the one who had to figure things out on my own. And honestly, it wasn't even like I wanted their help. I just wanted them to see me, to acknowledge that I existed, and that my life mattered just as much as Sarah's and Chris's. As I lay there in bed, staring into the darkness, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I mean, I was still frustrated, but the fire I'd felt earlier had simmered down. Instead, I felt this deep sense of exhaustion, like I was just tired of it all. Tired of trying to fight for a place in a family that seemed to have decided long ago that I wasn't worth the same attention as my siblings. I don't know what time I finally fell asleep, but when I woke up the next morning, everything felt a little clearer. Not easier, just clearer. I knew that nothing was going to change unless I made it change. They weren't going to suddenly wake up one day and realize how unfair they'd been. It was up to me to make them see it. The problem was, how? I wasn't even sure where to start. Part of me wanted to just cut ties completely and go on with my life. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the answer. As messed up as things were, they were still my family. I didn't want to walk away from them, not entirely. I just wanted things to be different. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time that morning, staring out the window at the empty street below. It was early, barely past 7 a.m., and everything was still and quiet. I couldn't stop thinking about all the times I'd tried to bring up these issues before, how I'd hinted at the unfairness only to be brushed off or told I was overreacting. But I wasn't overreacting. I just never had the chance to really lay it all out for them. That's when it hit me. The only way they were going to understand was if I showed them, plain and simple. I needed to spell it out in a way they couldn't ignore or argue against. Numbers don't lie, right? I wasn't sure if they'd listen, but at least they wouldn't be able to dismiss me as dramatic or jealous like they had so many times before. I spent the rest of the morning digging through old files, emails, bank statements, anything that could help me make my point. I had receipts for the tools my parents helped me buy, But I also knew they'd helped Sarah and Chris with so much more over the years. I started putting everything together, organizing it all into neat little piles that told the story I'd been trying to tell for years. It wasn't easy. Going through all those old documents was like ripping open old wounds. I found emails where my parents had promised Sarah money for a down payment on her house, and then I found texts from my dad saying they couldn't really help me out with rent because they had already given a lot to Sarah that year. It stung. It really stung. But it also motivated me. This wasn't just in my head. I had the proof right in front of me. As I worked, my phone buzzed a few times. More texts from Emily, probably still trying to get me to talk it out. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready to talk. I needed to be prepared first, and I wasn't there yet. I ended up working all day. By the time I finished putting everything together, it was late afternoon, and I was drained, mentally and emotionally. But I had something solid now, something I could take to them and say, look, this is what I've been dealing with. This is why I'm upset. It felt like a weird kind of victory, but not in a happy way. More like, okay, now they have to listen. It wasn't going to be easy, and I knew they'd probably get defensive, especially Sarah. She always acted like she was entitled to everything she got, but I was ready for that now. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the pile of papers in front of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of something. I wasn't just sitting back and letting things happen to me anymore. I was taking charge of the situation. Now, all that was left was to decide when and how I was going to confront them. I didn't want to do it over the phone or through texts. This needed to be face to face. But the thought of sitting down with all of them again after what happened at dinner made my stomach turn. It was going to be awkward as hell, but it had to be done. I knew they were planning another family dinner soon, something for Emily's birthday. The timing wasn't great. Who wants to ruin a birthday? But honestly, when was there ever a good time to bring this stuff up? There wasn't. And I wasn't about to wait around for another year hoping things would magically get better. So that was it. I'd confront them at Emily's birthday dinner. It wasn't going to be pretty, and it definitely wasn't going to be easy, but it was time to stop pretending like everything was fine. I wasn't going to be the forgotten one anymore. When the day of Emily's birthday dinner rolled around, I was nervous. I had everything ready. Every document, every piece of evidence that showed just how much my parents had favored Sarah and Chris over me. But knowing I was about to walk into a situation that was going to be awkward, uncomfortable, and probably end with a lot of yelling, didn't sit right with me. I wasn't trying to ruin Emily's birthday, but there wasn't exactly a perfect moment to do this. It had to happen, and it had to be soon. I got to my parents' house a little early, probably to give myself time to calm my nerves. When I walked in, everything seemed normal, like nothing had happened a few nights ago at that disaster of a family dinner. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner, and Dad was out back, grilling something on the BBQ like he always did when the weather was nice. Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely oblivious to what was about to go down. She looked up when she saw me and gave me a smile. "Hey Michael, you good?" she asked, like everything was fine between us. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't fine, though. My heart was racing, and I could feel the folder full of documents tucked under my arm like it was burning a hole through my shirt, but I had to keep it together. Sarah and Chris showed up not long after, laughing and chatting like they hadn't noticed anything wrong either. It was amazing how easily they just moved on from things. Meanwhile, I'd been carrying the weight of all this crap for years, and it was finally about to explode. We sat down to eat, and for the first 20 minutes or so, it was the same as always. Mom asked about work. Sarah talked about some upcoming vacation with her husband. Chris made a joke about how he still couldn't believe how expensive weddings were. I sat there, barely touching my food, waiting for the right moment. And then it came. After we'd finished eating and everyone was settling into dessert, I put my fork down and cleared my throat. "I need to talk to you all," I said, my voice sounding way more confident than I felt. Everyone looked up at me, confused. Dad raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Michael?" I took a deep breath and opened the folder, pulling out the first set of documents. I've been thinking a lot about what happened the other night, and I realized that I've never really laid it all out for you guys. I've been carrying this around for years, and it's time I showed you why I feel the way I do. Mom looked concerned, glancing at the folder. "Michael, can't we just enjoy the evening? It's Emily's birthday." "I know," I interrupted, trying not to let her guilt me into backing down. "And I'm sorry, but there's never going to be a good time to do this. I need you all to listen." I stood up and walked over to the living room, hooking my laptop up to the TV. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I clicked through the folders on my desktop, pulling up the presentation I'd spent days putting together. It wasn't fancy, just a slideshow with numbers, dates, and pictures of the documents I'd gathered. The first slide was simple, a chart comparing how much my parents had spent on each of us for education. Sarah's name was at the top, followed by Chris, then Emily. My name sat at the bottom, with a number that was embarrassingly low compared to the rest. "What's this?" Chris asked, leaning forward on the couch. "This is what I've been dealing with," I said, keeping my voice calm even though my hands were shaking. "This is how much you spent on Sarah's college tuition. And this," I clicked to the next slide, "is how much you spent on Chris's graduate degree. And here's Emily's, all her student loans covered." I paused for a moment, letting the numbers sink in. Sarah and Chris exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one said anything yet. "And this," I said, clicking to the final slide, "is how much you gave me. $7,000 for tools. That's it. No tuition help, no house down payment, no wedding fund, just $7,000. The room was silent. I could see the wheels turning in their heads as they processed the numbers. Mom looked like she was about to cry, and Dad was frowning, clearly not happy with where this was going. "Michael," Mom started, but I cut her off. "I'm not saying you didn't help me," I said, trying to stay calm. "But you can't sit there and tell me this is fair. Look at the difference. You gave them everything they needed to get ahead, and I got leftovers." Dad sighed and leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "We gave you what we thought you needed, Michael. You didn't ask for help with school." "I didn't ask because I knew you wouldn't offer," I shot back. "And I shouldn't have to beg to get the same support Sarah and Chris got. You just handed it to them. You didn't even think twice." Sarah, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke. "Michael, why are you bringing this up now? We never knew you felt this way." "Because every time I've tried to bring it up, you've all brushed me off," I said, my frustration creeping into my voice. "Every time I've hinted that maybe things aren't as fair as you think, you've told me to stop being dramatic or that I should be grateful for what I got. But it's not about the money. It's about how you've all made me feel like I don't matter as much as you." Emily looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable with the whole thing. "I didn't know it was this bad, Michael," she mumbled. "That's the point," I said, clicking off the presentation. "None of you knew because none of you bothered to look. You were all too busy living your perfect lives, and I was just there, trying to keep my head above water." There was a long pause after that. Mom wiped a tear from her eye, and Dad was still frowning, but no one argued. For the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. "I'm not asking for an apology," I said, breaking the silence. "I just wanted you to see what I've been dealing with. I wanted you to understand why I feel the way I do." The room stayed quiet, and I could feel the tension in the air. No one knew what to say, and honestly, that was fine with me. I didn't need them to say anything. I just needed them to see. After my presentation, I could tell no one really knew what to say. The air was thick, like the tension had just doubled, and everyone was stuck in their heads trying to figure out how to respond without making things worse. Honestly, I wasn't expecting an immediate apology or some big resolution right there at the table, but I had hope for something, maybe some acknowledgement that what I'd been feeling wasn't all in my head. I sat back down, my heart still racing. I could see my mom fidgeting with her napkin, her eyes darting from one of my siblings to the next, trying to gauge what everyone was thinking. Dad hadn't said much since the presentation started, but I could tell he wasn't happy. His arms were crossed, and his jaw was clenched like he was trying to keep himself from saying the wrong thing. Classic dad move, hold it in until he explodes later. Sarah finally broke the silence. "I didn't realize it was that bad," she said softly, her voice sounding more serious than I was used to. She didn't look at me, though, just kind of stared down at the table, poking at the remains of her cake. I raised an eyebrow. "You didn't realize? Come on, Sarah, it's not like this is new. I've been dropping hints for years, and every time I brought something up, it got brushed aside." She glanced at me for a split second before going back to her cake. "I don't know. I guess I don't know." It wasn't much of an answer, but at least she was saying something. Chris, on the other hand, still looked annoyed, like I'd just ruined a perfectly good evening with all my drama. "Michael, I get that you feel like you've been left out or whatever, but we all got what we needed," he said, leaning back in his chair. "I mean, I worked hard too. Just because Mom and Dad helped me out doesn't mean I didn't put in the effort." That hit a nerve. Effort? Are you serious, Chris? "I'm not saying you didn't work hard, but you didn't have to struggle the way I did," I snapped. "You always had a safety net. Mom and Dad were there for you every step of the way, making sure you had everything you needed. Meanwhile, I was scraping by, trying to figure things out on my own. It's not the same, and you know it. Chris shrugged, like he still didn't get it, or didn't care to. It's not about effort, I continued, trying to keep my voice steady. It's about how you guys got handed opportunities I never had. It's about the difference between me having to hustle just to get by, while you had the luxury of focusing on your dreams without worrying about rent or bills. Emily, who'd been quiet this whole time, finally spoke up. Michael, I'm sorry. I really didn't know you felt this way. I didn't even think about the money side of things. I sighed. That's the thing. No one thought about it because it wasn't affecting you. It's easy to ignore something when it doesn't directly impact your life. She nodded, looking a little guilty, and for a moment I thought maybe she actually got it. Maybe they all did, at least a little, but I still wasn't convinced. Dad cleared his throat, and we all turned to him. He'd been so quiet I'd almost forgotten he was sitting there. Michael, your mom and we never meant to make you feel this way, he said, his voice slow and careful, like he was picking each word cautiously. We thought we were doing what was best for all of you. I could feel the frustration bubbling up again, but I bit my tongue. I needed to hear him out. We gave Sarah and Chris what they needed for school because that's what they asked for. You, on the other hand, you never really asked for much. You always seemed so independent, like you didn't want our help. I blinked at him, not sure if he was being serious or if he just didn't get it. Dad, I didn't ask for help because every time I tried, I was told there wasn't any money left, or that you'd already done enough for me. What was the point of asking if I knew what the answer was going to be? Mom jumped in at that point, her voice softer, almost pleading. Michael, we did what we thought was fair, based on what each of you needed at the time. Maybe we didn't realize the gap was so big, but we were trying to do our best. I shook my head, rubbing my temples. It's not just about the money, Mom. It's about how I've been made to feel like the odd one out my entire life. You guys were so wrapped up in making sure Sarah and Chris were taken care of that you didn't even notice I was struggling. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was just asking to be seen. The room fell silent again, the weight of my words hanging in the air. I could tell my parents were processing it, trying to figure out how to respond. Dad let out a long sigh, looking older than I remembered. Michael, we never wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. We love you. You know that, right? I nodded, but it felt hollow. I know you love me, but love isn't just about words. It's about actions. And your actions have made it pretty clear where your priorities were. Mom wiped at her eyes with a tissue, her voice trembling as she spoke. We didn't mean to hurt you, Michael. We really didn't. I could feel my anger starting to fade, replaced by a dull ache in my chest. I wasn't looking to hurt them either. I just wanted things to be different. I wanted them to understand how much this had affected me, and I wasn't sure if they fully did. But at least the conversation was happening. That was something, right? Sarah cleared her throat, breaking the silence. I think we need to figure out a way to make this right. It's not fair that Michael's been left out, and we can't just ignore that. Chris nodded, though he still didn't look happy about it. Yeah, maybe we can figure something out. Mom and Dad exchanged a glance, and for the first time in a long time it felt like we were all on the same page, or at least heading in the right direction. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of exhaustion and relief. This wasn't going to fix everything. Years of feeling like the forgotten one in my family weren't going to disappear overnight. But maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something better. After that last family dinner, I told my parents and siblings that I'd had enough. I was done being the afterthought, done being the one who always had to accept less while they got more. I remember sitting there, telling them that I planned on talking to the rest of the family about it. I wanted to hear their opinions because honestly, I was curious if anyone else had ever noticed how I'd been treated. That's when my dad, of all people, turned to me with this cold look on his face. Michael, you should just be happy with what you got, he said. If you don't like it, then maybe you should leave. That hit hard. I mean, I always knew where I stood with them, but hearing it so bluntly like that, it felt like the last nail in the coffin. So I did exactly what he said. I left. Not just that night, but for good. From that point on, I decided to focus on me. I had wasted too much time trying to get their approval, trying to make them see me as an equal. It wasn't worth it anymore. I threw myself into my work, into building the life I wanted without them weighing me down. I knew I had potential, and I wasn't going to let their lack of support hold me back any longer. It wasn't easy at first. Walking away from your family isn't something you can just do without feeling some guilt. But the more I distanced myself, the more I realized how much energy I had been putting into trying to win their approval. I started to focus on my career, putting in the hours, and really grinding. And guess what? It paid off. A few years went by, and my life completely turned around. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. My work was going better than I ever could have imagined. I started off small, just trying to make ends meet, but eventually I grew my business to the point where I was hiring more employees. I had a full team working for me, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd built it all on my own was something I'd never felt before. And here's the thing, I didn't just get by, I did really well. The kind of success that made me look back at all those times I felt like I wasn't good enough and laugh. I had clients coming in from all over, and I was making connections that I never thought I'd have. I guess, in a weird way, walking away from my family pushed me to prove that I could make something of myself without their help. But just as I was settling into this new phase of my life, I got a call. It was from my mom, which surprised me because we hadn't talked much since I left. My phone buzzed and her name flashed on the screen. For a moment, I debated ignoring it, but something in me decided to pick up. "Michael, we need to meet," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. There was something in her tone that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the usual, "we need to talk" guilt trip I had gotten used to over the years. It sounded desperate. I hesitated. Meeting with them wasn't something I really wanted to do, but curiosity got the better of me. So, after some back and forth, we agreed to meet at a cafe. When I walked in, they were already sitting at a small table near the window. They looked different, tired, older. My dad, who always had this confident, almost arrogant posture, was slouched in his chair, looking more worn out than I'd ever seen him. Mom had dark circles under her eyes, and she kept fidgeting with her cup, which wasn't like her at all. Something was off. "Thanks for coming," my mom said as I sat down. I didn't say much, just nodded, waiting for them to get to the point. After a moment of awkward silence, my dad finally spoke up. "Your siblings, they've cut contact with us," he said, his voice quieter than I expected. I blinked, not sure if I'd heard him right. "What do you mean?" "They don't talk to us anymore," my mom chimed in, her voice shaky. "Sarah moved away with her husband and she won't return our calls. Chris, he's distanced himself too. And Emily, well, we haven't heard from her in months." I sat there, trying to process what they were saying. It was hard to believe, honestly. Sarah, Chris, and Emily had always been the golden children, the ones who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. Now they were the ones who had walked away. We're struggling, Michael," my mom continued. "Without them, we're really struggling. Financially, emotionally, everything." There it was. The real reason they wanted to meet. They needed help. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a mix of emotions swirling inside me. A part of me felt like this was some kind of twisted karma. They had pushed me aside for years, ignored me when I needed support, and now they were the ones coming to me for help? The irony wasn't lost on me, but at the same time, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I wasn't sitting there thinking, "Ha, this is what you deserve." Instead, I just felt tired. Tired of all the drama, the years of resentment, the constant need to prove myself. "So, what exactly do you want from me?" I finally asked, keeping my voice steady. "We were hoping you could help us out," my dad said, avoiding eye contact. "We know things haven't been great between us, but we're really in a tough spot, financially especially." There it was, the money. I should have seen it coming. I looked between the two of them, wondering if they had any idea how ridiculous this all was. The same parents who had told me to be happy with what I got were now asking me for help because their golden children had ditched them. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I mean, you made it pretty clear a few years ago that I wasn't your priority. And now you're asking me to help you because Sarah and Chris don't want to?" They looked at each other, and for a moment, I saw something in their faces that I hadn't seen before. Regret. Real genuine regret. "We know we messed up, Michael," my mom said softly. "We should have treated you better. We didn't realize it until it was too late." I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. There was a part of me that wanted to forgive them, to be the bigger person. But another part of me, the part that had spent years feeling overlooked and undervalued, wasn't ready to let go of all that hurt. "I'll think about it," I said, standing up to leave. "But I'm not making any promises." As I walked out of the cafe, I realized something. I didn't owe them anything. Not anymore. This story is titled, "Parents Told Me My College Fund Was Gone. Turns out, they secretly invested it in my brother's dreams." Hey everyone! If you're enjoying these stories and want to support the channel, Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, takes only a second, and helps me bring you even more awesome content like this. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, "When I got the acceptance letter from my dream college, it was one of the happiest days of my life. I'd worked so hard to get to this point, pulling all-nighters, spending my weekends in the library, skipping out on parties to ace every exam. This was the payoff, the validation of years of effort. The engineering program was one of the best in the country, and I was so ready to start this new chapter. I imagined myself walking across campus, moving into the dorms, meeting new people, and diving headfirst into challenging coursework. The first person I told was my mom. She gave me a big smile, hugged me, and said she was proud. My dad nodded and said, 'That's my boy.' In that way he always did when I accomplished something he liked to take credit for. Everything seemed fine at first, but when I brought up the tuition, their reactions weren't what I expected. I still remember sitting at the kitchen table with them. I had my acceptance packet laid out, showing them all the details about costs and scholarships. I was excited, maybe a little nervous, but I thought we were just going to figure out the logistics together. That's when my dad let out this big sigh. "We just don't have the money for college right now, son," he said. For a second, I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" I asked. I thought there was a fund for this. My dad started rambling about how the economy had been tough lately. My mom chimed in, mentioning my brother's medical bills. It was like they had rehearsed the excuse because they passed the explanation back and forth like it was a relay race. The more they talked, the more obvious it became that this wasn't news they had just discovered. "But you've always said you've been saving since I was a kid," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You always told me not to worry because you were setting money aside for college." My mom couldn't meet my eyes. She stared at her hands like they were suddenly the most interesting thing in the room. "We had to use that money for emergencies," she said softly. "Sweetie, I'm so sorry." It was like someone had punched me in the chest. I sat there, stunned, trying to process what they were saying. Sure, I knew my brother's health had been bad for a while. He'd been diagnosed with a chronic condition a few years back, and the treatment couldn't have been cheap. But I still didn't understand how everything could just be gone. "Maybe you could take out some loans," my dad suggested, "or start at community college and transfer later. Lots of people do that." I nodded, but it was automatic. My head was spinning. I had worked so hard, had done everything right, and now I was supposed to settle for something less? I didn't even know what to say to them. I just mumbled, "Yeah, I'll figure something out," and left the room. For the next few weeks, I threw myself into researching financial aid and loan options. I started looking into cheaper schools, even though it felt like giving up on my dreams. But the more I thought about it, the more something didn't sit right with me. My parents had always been so supportive of my education before. They were the ones who pushed me to aim for top colleges, to join clubs, and take AP classes. Now they seemed almost indifferent, like my future wasn't their problem anymore. The change in their attitude was too sharp to ignore. They didn't ask about my plans, didn't offer to help me figure out alternatives. Every time I brought up college, they either changed the subject or gave me some vague platitude about how everything would work out. It felt like I had gone from being the kid they were proud of to someone they didn't want to deal with anymore. One night, I overheard them talking in the living room. My dad was saying something about my brother's big opportunity and how they needed to support him now because it's his time to shine. My mom agreed, saying she believed it was a worthy investment. At first, I thought they were talking about his medical treatment, but the way they phrased it felt off. I tried to push the doubts out of my mind, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but the seed was planted, and it kept growing. I started noticing little things, like how they perked up every time my brother called to talk about his business plans. Meanwhile, my college prospects were treated like an afterthought. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I was in my dad's office looking for a copy of my birth certificate. I needed it for one of the financial aid forms, and my mom said it was probably in the filing cabinet. As I flipped through the folders, I stumbled across one labeled with my brother's name. I know I shouldn't have opened it. I wasn't trying to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside, I found a stack of papers that made my stomach drop. It wasn't medical bills like I expected. It was an investment contract. My parents had poured a massive amount of money into my brother's tech startup. And the kicker? The date on the contract was 2 weeks before they told me my college fund was gone. My hands were shaking as I read through the details. They had invested everything they had saved for me, money they'd promised would secure my future, into my brother's business. The betrayal hit me like a freight train. All those years of hearing them talk about how important education was. All those late nights I spent studying because they told me it would pay off. And this was the thanks I got. I put the file back where I found it and left the office, feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. For the rest of the day, I couldn't even look at them. Every time I tried, all I could see was that folder and the lies they had told me. After finding that investment contract, I couldn't look at my parents the same way. Everything about them felt fake. Their smiles, their reassurances, even their so-called apologies about the college fund. I kept replaying that night over and over in my head, how they sat there telling me they couldn't afford to send me to school, while knowing they'd already handed my future over to my brother. At first, I thought maybe there was more to the story. Maybe they had a good reason, something I didn't understand yet. I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt, but deep down, I knew better. I started paying closer attention to their behavior. My dad seemed a little too interested in every update about my brother's company. My mom got this proud, almost giddy look on her face every time she talked about how innovative his idea was. Meanwhile, whenever I brought up school, they barely gave me the time of day. It felt like I'd been demoted from son to, what? A backup plan? A responsibility they didn't want to deal with anymore? I felt like I didn't belong in my own family. For days, I debated whether to confront them. Part of me wanted to scream at them, demand to know how they could do this to me. But another part of me wasn't ready. I needed to know the full story before I said anything, so I started digging. I spent hours trying to piece things together. I went through bank statements I found in the same filing cabinet, looking for anything that confirmed what I already suspected. I didn't want to believe it, but there it was, clear as day. The numbers matched up. Every penny they had set aside for my college fund was gone, transferred into some account tied to my brother's startup. I wasn't angry at my brother, at least not at first. I figured he probably didn't even know where the money came from. But the fact that my parents had made that choice, had prioritized his business over my education, made my blood boil. They had taken something that was supposed to be mine, something they had promised me for years, and given it to him without a second thought. Then there were the conversations I overheard. Late at night, when they thought I was asleep, my parents would talk about how the risk was worth it, and how they believed my brother's startup would pay off in the long run. My dad kept saying things like, "This is the best chance we have to set him up for life." Set him up for life? What about me? One night I couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting in my room, staring at the acceptance letter from my dream college. It felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of something I couldn't have. My stomach churned every time I thought about it. That's when I decided I couldn't keep quiet any longer. The next day, I was sitting at the kitchen table when my dad walked in. My mom was out running errands, and it was just the two of us. I figured it was as good a time as any. "Hey, Dad," I said, trying to sound casual. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up from his coffee, raising an eyebrow. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a second, then said, "How much did you guys invest in Mike's business?" For a split second, he froze. It was subtle, but I caught it. He quickly recovered, setting his coffee down and giving me this confused look. "What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I saw the papers, Dad. The investment contract. The dates." His face hardened, and for the first time in my life, I saw him drop the dad act. He wasn't apologetic or ashamed. He was defensive. "That's none of your concern," he said flatly. "It's my concern when you used my college fund to do it," I shot back. "You told me there wasn't any money for school, but there was enough to gamble on Mike's startup." "It wasn't a gamble," he snapped. "It was an investment. We believe in your brother's potential. This could be life-changing for him." "And what about me?" I demanded. "What about my future? Or does that not matter to you anymore?" He didn't answer. He just sat there, glaring at me like I was being unreasonable. At that moment, I realized there wasn't going to be an apology. He didn't feel bad about what he'd done. In his mind, he had made the right decision, and I was just supposed to accept it. When my mom got home later that day, I confronted her too. She cried, of course. She always cried when she didn't want to take responsibility for something. She kept saying things like, "We thought it was the best choice for the family and we didn't mean to hurt you," but all I could think was, "You didn't think about me at all." Over the next few days, the tension in the house was unbearable. My dad avoided me, my mom acted like a martyr, and my brother was oblivious to the whole thing. Eventually, I realized there was no point in staying. I couldn't trust them anymore. They didn't see me as a priority, and I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. So I started making plans to leave. It wasn't an easy decision. I didn't have much money saved up, and I knew things would be tough. But I also knew I couldn't stay in a place where I was always going to be second best. The tension in the house grew thicker by the day after I confronted my parents. My dad acted like I didn't exist, and my mom tried to tiptoe around me, but neither of them showed any sign of regret. It felt like they were waiting for me to calm down and get over it, as if their betrayal was just a misunderstanding I'd eventually forget. Meanwhile, my brother, Mike, came home for Sunday dinner like everything was fine. He walked into the house with that confident, easygoing smile he always had, oblivious to the storm brewing under the surface. My parents greeted him like he was a celebrity, asking about his business and showering him with praise. I sat at the dinner table, silently fuming, watching the whole scene play out like I wasn't even there. Dinner started as it always did. My mom asked Mike about his latest progress, and he launched into a story about how his company was gaining traction. He talked about potential investors, new ideas he was working on, and how proud he was of everything he'd accomplished. My parents hung on his every word, their faces lighting up like he'd just cured cancer. I couldn't take it anymore. So, I said, cutting through the conversation, how much did Mom and Dad invest in your startup? The room went dead silent. Mike froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. My dad's face turned beet red, and my mom's smile vanished in an instant. What? Mike asked, clearly confused. He looked between me and our parents, trying to figure out what was going on. You heard me, I said, my voice steady but sharp. How much of my college fund did they pour into your business? Enough, my dad snapped, slamming his hand on the table. This isn't the time or place to bring this up. It's exactly the time and place, I shot back. You think I'm just going to sit here and play along like everything's fine? You lied to me. You told me there was no money for school, and then you gave it all to him. Mike looked stunned. Wait, what? I didn't know that money was for your college, he said, turning to our parents. Is that true? My mom started to stammer, but my dad cut her off. What we do with our money is none of his business, he said coldly. None of my business? I repeated, my voice rising. It became my business when you let me believe I'd have the chance to go to college. You made me think my future mattered to you, but I guess I was wrong. Sweetie, it's not like that, my mom said, her voice shaky. She reached across the table like she was trying to calm me down. We had to make a choice. Your brother's business is an investment in the future. You thought what? I interrupted, my anger boiling over. That my education wasn't worth it? That his pipe dream was more important than everything I've been working toward? Do you even realize what you've done? Mike held up his hands defensively. Look, I didn't know about this. If I had known it was your college money, I wouldn't have taken it. Save it, I snapped, turning to him. You're not the problem here. They are. And honestly, I'm not surprised. You've always been their favorite. At least now they're done pretending otherwise. My dad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. That's enough, he barked. You're acting like a spoiled child. Do you have any idea how hard we've worked to support this family? We did what we thought was best for everyone. Best for everyone? I laughed bitterly. You mean best for Mike? You didn't even think about me. You made a decision that ruined my future, and now you're mad because I won't just sit here and take it? You don't understand the bigger picture, my dad said, his tone patronizing. This business has the potential to change all of our lives. You're being short-sighted. I'm being short-sighted? I yelled. You're the ones who threw away my college fund on a gamble. You didn't just lie to me, you made it crystal clear where I stand in this family. Well, guess what? I'm done. I'm done being the afterthought. I pushed back my chair and stood up. My mom was crying, my dad was glaring at me, and Mike looked like he wanted to disappear. You can keep your money, I said, grabbing my bag. I don't need it. I'll figure out my own future, and it'll be without you. I walked out of the house, ignoring their calls for me to come back. My mom was sobbing, begging me to stay, but I couldn't. I couldn't sit there for another second and pretend we were still a family. That night, I packed up my things. I didn't have much, just a duffel bag of clothes, my laptop, and a few $100 I'd saved from my part-time job. I didn't have a plan, but I didn't care. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house anymore. I slept in my car that night, parked in a grocery store lot. It wasn't comfortable, but it felt better than being under their roof. For the first time, I felt free. Not in a happy way, but in a way that meant I didn't have to rely on anyone who didn't value me. The first few weeks after I left home were a blur. I lived out of my car, parked in random lots, and spent my days trying to figure out what to do next. I didn't have much money, just a few $100 I'd saved up from part-time jobs during high school. That money disappeared fast when you factor in food, gas, and the occasional cheap motel when sleeping in the car became unbearable. I ignored every call and text from my parents. My mom sent long, emotional messages about how she loved me and didn't want our family to fall apart. My dad, on the other hand, was all about tough love. You need to grow up, he texted once. The real world isn't going to coddle you. It was infuriating. He acted like I was the one who had done something wrong, like leaving was a temper tantrum and not a response to years of being overlooked and treated like I didn't matter. I didn't even know how to respond, so I didn't. I just let their messages pile up and focused on surviving. I eventually landed in a small town a few states away. I hadn't planned to end up there, but I ran out of gas and money at the same time, so it felt like fate. The town wasn't anything special, just a handful of stores, a diner, and a few small businesses, but it was quiet and nobody knew me. I walked into the diner, desperate for a job. The manager, a tired-looking guy in his 50s, took one look at me and said, "You start tomorrow." I didn't even ask what the pay was. I just nodded, thanked him, and spent the last of my cash on a tank of gas and a pack of ramen to eat in my car. The work wasn't glamorous, just waiting tables and cleaning up after shifts, but it was enough to get by. I lived off tips, saving every penny I could. A week later, I picked up a second job at a local garage, helping with oil changes and basic repairs. It wasn't exactly my dream life, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't relying on anyone else. The days blurred together. I worked from early morning at the garage to late at night at the diner. My body ached and I barely had time to think. But in some strange way, I felt free. I didn't have my parents hovering over me, didn't have to hear about how great my brother was doing. It was just me, figuring things out one day at a time. One night, after a particularly long shift, I sat in my car eating cold ramen and scrolling through my phone. I saw another text from my mom, this one longer than usual. She talked about how much she missed me, how things hadn't been the same since I left. "Your father and I just want to talk," she wrote. "We can work this out as a family." I rolled my eyes. Now she wanted to work things out? Where was this energy when I was still living at home, begging them to care about my future? I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat and tried to ignore the knot of emotions in my chest. But as much as I wanted to shut them out completely, part of me still cared. I hated that about myself. After everything they'd done, some small, stupid part of me still wanted their approval. It was like I couldn't let go of the idea that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally see me as more than the backup son. Months went by. I settled into a routine, and things started to stabilize. I managed to save up enough to rent a tiny room above a hardware store. It wasn't much, a bed, a desk, and a shared bathroom, but it felt like a palace compared to sleeping in my car. I started looking into local colleges, figuring out how I could take a few classes while working. It wasn't the prestigious program I'd dreamed of, but it was a start. One day, while I was wiping down tables at the diner, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw my brother's name. For a second, I considered ignoring it, like I had every other call from him. But curiosity got the better of me. "Hello?" I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Hey," he said, sounding awkward. I just wanted to check in. Mom told me you left." "Yeah, no thanks to you," I said flatly. There was a long pause. "Look, I didn't know about the money," he said finally. "If I'd known, I wouldn't have taken it, I swear." "Doesn't really change anything, does it?" I said. "You still got it, and I got nothing." "I know," he said quietly. I didn't want you to think I was part of it. I'm sorry, man. For real." I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to believe him, but another part of me couldn't shake the resentment. He was still their golden child, the one they'd chosen to invest in while leaving me behind. His apology didn't change that. "Thanks for the call," I said finally. "But I've got to get back to work." He sighed, but didn't push. "Okay, take care of yourself." I hung up, feeling more conflicted than ever. On one hand, it was nice to hear him acknowledge the situation. On the other hand, it didn't fix anything. I was still scraping by while he chased his dreams, backed by the parents who were supposed to support both of us. That night, I sat in my tiny room, staring at the stack of community college brochures I'd picked up. I thought about all the dreams I'd had for my future, how much I'd sacrificed to get into that engineering program. It still hurt to know I'd never have that. But as I looked around the room, I realized something else. I was making it on my own. It wasn't perfect, and it definitely wasn't easy, but it was mine. Months passed, and life started to feel a little more manageable. I was working 2 jobs, scraping by in my tiny rented room, and slowly piecing together what my future might look like. It wasn't glamorous by any stretch, but I was proud of myself for making it this far. I'd gone from having everything ripped away to standing on my own, no matter how rough the road was. Then one day, out of nowhere, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered anyway. "Hello?" "It's me," said a voice I hadn't heard in months. "My mom." I almost hung up. I didn't have the energy for her guilt trips or excuses, but something in her voice stopped me. She sounded different. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. I left your father, she said. Just like that. No build-up, no preamble. I sat there, stunned. What? I left him, she repeated. I can't do it anymore. I can't keep pretending everything's okay when it's not. I should have done it years ago. My mind was racing. This wasn't the woman I'd grown up with, the one who always backed my dad no matter how wrong he was. Why now? I asked cautiously. Because of you, she said. Because I can't keep living with what we did to you. Watching you leave, knowing how much we hurt you, it made me realize how wrong things have been for a long time. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to scream at her, tell her it was too late to make things right. But another part, the part that still cared, wanted to believe her. Look, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she continued, but I want to try to make things right. I sold the house. Half of it is yours. It should have been your college fund in the first place. I hope it's enough for you to start over. I was speechless. For months, I'd been grinding just to get by, and now she was offering me a lifeline. But at what cost? What about Dad? I asked finally. She sighed. He's angry, of course. He still thinks he did the right thing. He's convinced Mike's business is the key to everything. And Mike? He's upset too, but he gets it. He knows we messed up, even if your father doesn't. I leaned back in my chair, trying to process everything. My mom was finally taking a stand, finally admitting what they'd done was wrong. But I couldn't just let go of all the pain, all the resentment, that easily. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything right now, she said. Just think about it. And know that I'm truly sorry for everything. I should have stood up for you sooner. I failed you as a mother, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After we hung up, I sat in silence for what felt like hours. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Anger? Gratitude? It was all jumbled together in my chest, making it hard to breathe. Over the next few weeks, I watched as my mom followed through on her promises. She sold the house and sent me half of the proceeds. It wasn't enough to cover all 4 years of college, but it was a good start. I enrolled in a local college's engineering program. Nothing fancy, but it had everything I needed. Moving forward felt strange, almost surreal. For so long, I'd been in survival mode, just trying to get through each day. Now, I had something to work toward again, a reason to keep pushing. My mom moved to the same town, renting a small apartment nearby. She got a job as a bookkeeper and started over too. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it felt different, more honest. She wasn't the same person she'd been when I was growing up, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or if it just made me sad for the time we'd lost. As for my brother, he called me a few more times. Each time he apologized for what happened and tried to make amends. He even offered to repay the money my parents had invested in his startup, but I turned him down. I don't want it, I told him. It's not about the money anymore. It's about what it meant, what they chose. He didn't argue, but I could tell he felt guilty. He should have, honestly. Even if he hadn't known where the money came from, he'd always been the golden child, and he'd never stopped to question why. My dad, on the other hand, stayed silent. He didn't call, didn't text, didn't even try to reach out. I heard from my mom that he was furious about the house being sold and blamed me for ruining the family. I couldn't bring myself to care. He'd made his choice, and I'd made mine. College was hard, especially while working part-time to cover the costs my mom's contribution couldn't. But it felt good to be back on track, to be working toward a future I could be proud of. Some nights, I'd sit in my dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and papers, and think about how much had changed in just a year. The pain of my parents' betrayal was still there, but it didn't define me anymore. I'd learned to rely on myself, to fight for what I wanted even when the odds were stacked against me. And I'd learned that family isn't about blood or loyalty, it's about trust and respect. My relationship with my mom is still a work in progress. We're trying, but there's a lot of history to untangle. As for my brother, I'm not sure where we stand. He's made efforts to rebuild our relationship, but I'm not ready to let go of everything yet. My dad? I don't think I'll ever forgive him. He chose his pride and his vision of success over his own son, and that's not something I can forget. But despite everything, I'm proud of how far I've come. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to anyone else's opinion or investment. It's something I've built on my own, and that, to me, is the best kind of victory. Told my ex-in-laws their cheating daughter isn't my problem anymore. All right, let's start from the beginning. So, me and Jess, we were together for 7 years, married for 2 of them. We waited to have kids, because we wanted to make sure we were good financially first, just trying to be responsible. Anyway, things were going fine for a while, or so I thought. After we hit that 2-year mark, we decided it was time to try for a baby. That felt like the natural next step for us. Looking back now, I don't know how I missed it. The little signs were there, but when you're in it, you don't see them. I just thought we were having the usual ups and downs every couple has, nothing major. I mean, I loved Jess. I thought we were in this for the long haul, but man, was I wrong. So a few months go by, we're trying for a kid, and I'm feeling pretty good about everything. I'm thinking about the future, picturing what life's going to be like as a dad. I had no clue what was coming. One night, I was at home just chilling, and I noticed Jess was acting kind of weird. She was on her phone a lot more than usual, but I didn't think much of it at first. I figured maybe she was just chatting with her friends or something. But then she started staying out late, saying she had work stuff or that she was meeting up with friends. Now, at this point, part of me was like, hey, maybe something's up. But the other part of me didn't want to believe it. I trusted her, you know? You don't marry someone unless you trust them, right? So I brushed it off. But things kept getting stranger. She was distant, and I could feel this tension building between us, like we were in the same room but miles apart at the same time. I remember this one night. She came home super late. I'd already gone to bed, but I woke up when I heard her come in. She was trying to be quiet, but I could tell something was off. I asked her where she'd been, and she gave me some half-assed excuse about work drinks running late. She didn't even make eye contact when she said it, which was the first real red flag for me. But still, I let it slide because I didn't want to start a fight. I wasn't ready to face what I was starting to suspect. Things kept spiraling after that. Jess would go out more and more, and whenever I tried to ask her about it, she'd brush me off or get defensive. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband accusing his wife of cheating, so I kept it to myself. But deep down, I think I knew what was going on. I just didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I was trying to start a family with, would do something like that to me. Then, one night, everything came crashing down. I was at home, Jess had said she'd be working late again, and I was just sitting there, feeling like something was really wrong. You ever get that feeling in your gut? Like you just know something bad is about to happen? That's what I had. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. Now, before anyone jumps down my throat, I know it was a shitty thing to do. But at this point, I was desperate. I needed to know what the hell was going on. So, I unlocked her phone and started going through her messages. And there it was, right in front of me. All the proof I needed. She'd been texting some guy, Derek or something like that, for weeks. They'd been meeting up behind my back. And from the looks of it, things were way more than just friendly. My heart dropped. I couldn't believe it. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I didn't even know what to do. I sat there, staring at her phone, reading the messages over and over again, like maybe if I read them enough, they wouldn't be real. But they were. Jess had been cheating on me. I waited for her to get home that night. I didn't even know what I was going to say. I was just sitting there, stewing, thinking about all the lies she'd told me. When she finally walked in the door, she looked at me and knew something was up right away. I could see it in her eyes. I didn't waste any time. I just showed her the phone and asked her, "What the hell is this?" She froze. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd try to deny it, but she didn't. Instead, she started crying, like full-on sobbing, and I just stood there waiting for some kind of explanation. But all she kept saying was, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen." Didn't mean for it to happen? That's the thing that really got me. How do you not mean to cheat on your husband? How do you just accidentally betray someone like that? I wasn't having it. I told her right then and there that I wanted a divorce. She lost it. She started begging me to forgive her, saying we could go to couples therapy, that everyone makes mistakes, but I wasn't about to sit through therapy with someone who had been sneaking around behind my back for months. I couldn't believe she had the nerve to act like this was something we could just work through. Cheating is a deal breaker for me, always has been. Once the trust is broken, there's no going back. I think what pissed me off the most was how she tried to act like this wasn't her fault. Like she was some kind of victim of circumstance, or like I should just accept that everyone makes mistakes and move on. But I'm not that guy. I don't forgive cheating, ever. So I stuck to my decision. I told her there was no going back from this, and I was done. The next few days were a blur. I filed for divorce, and thanks to our prenup, it all went pretty quickly. Jess kept trying to get me to change my mind, though. She'd call me, show up at the house, even try to talk to my friends to get them to convince me to give her another chance. It was pathetic, honestly, but I wasn't about to let her worm her way back into my life. In the end, I'm just glad I had the prenup in place. It saved me from a lot of the financial mess that usually comes with divorce. I kept everything, my house, my savings, because she was the one who screwed up. It didn't make the situation any less painful, but at least I didn't lose everything on top of it. And that's how it all started, the end of my marriage and the beginning of the mess that followed. I didn't realize then just how much damage it would do to me emotionally, but trust me, that part's coming. 3 years later, and I'm still dealing with the fallout, but we'll get to that. All right, so fast forward to after the divorce. Like I said, I cut all contact with Jess. I wasn't interested in any kind of closure conversation or whatever. I just wanted to move on. So I changed my number, moved to a new place, and basically went full ghost mode. If I could have erased her from my memory, I would have. I wasn't even trying to hate her at this point. I just wanted to forget she ever existed. Those first few months after the divorce were rough. I mean, I wasn't out here crying myself to sleep or anything, but there was this emptiness. It's hard to explain. It's like when you've been with someone for so long, they become part of your routine, part of your life, and then suddenly they're just gone. Not that I missed Jess specifically, but I missed the idea of what I thought we had. That was the hard part to let go of, the life I thought we were building together. I remember one night I was sitting at home drinking a soda and just thinking about how everything went to shit so fast. I mean, one minute we're planning for kids, the next minute I'm signing divorce papers. It's crazy how quickly your whole life can flip upside down, but I guess that's life for you, huh? During that time, I started going to therapy. I wasn't super keen on it at first. I had never been the therapy type, but after everything that happened, I figured I could use some help sorting through the mess in my head. And honestly, it ended up being one of the best decisions I made. My therapist helped me realize that a lot of the stuff I was feeling wasn't just about Jess cheating. It was about a bunch of other things I hadn't dealt with, like growing up, I never really learned how to express my emotions. My family wasn't big on talking about feelings. You just sucked it up and dealt with it, you know? So when Jess cheated on me, I didn't know how to handle the betrayal. It was like all these emotions I had bottled up my whole life exploded at once, and I didn't know what to do with them. Therapy helped me unpack all that. Anyway, enough about that. Here's where things get interesting. 3 years pass. I'm doing better. Still not 100% over everything, but better. I'm focusing on work, going out with friends more, even started dating again, though nothing serious. I'd occasionally think about Jess, but not in a I miss her kind of way, more like a I hope she's miserable kind of way. Yeah, I know, that's petty, but whatever, it's how I felt. Then one day I'm at the grocery store just minding my own business, when I see them, Jess's parents. Now I hadn't seen or heard from them since the divorce, so this was completely unexpected. My first instinct was to just walk the other way and avoid the whole situation, but of course they saw me before I could make my escape. Jess's mom, let's call her Susan, came up to me all teary-eyed and emotional. I could already tell this was going to be some kind of guilt trip. Her dad, Tom, was with her, looking all solemn. I could feel the tension in the air before they even opened their mouths. And I was right. Susan immediately starts telling me about Jess. Apparently, Jess had been in a car accident. A bad one. She was in the hospital, in serious condition. I remember standing there, just kind of blank. Like, I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to feel? I wasn't exactly happy to hear she was hurt, but I also wasn't about to start feeling sorry for her. Susan kept going, saying how Jess had been through so much, how she was struggling, and then, get this, she asked me to visit her in the hospital. It would mean so much to her, Susan said. Despite everything, you were such an important part of her life. I almost laughed. I couldn't believe she actually thought I'd go visit Jess after everything that happened. Like, was she serious? I looked at her and all I could say was, Jess isn't my problem anymore. I thought that was a pretty reasonable response given the circumstances. But of course, that didn't go over well. Susan's eyes got all wide and she started talking about forgiveness, about how I should let go of the past and show some compassion. Compassion? For the woman who cheated on me? Yeah, no thanks. Tom, who had been silent up until this point, finally chimed in. He was calmer than Susan, but still gave me this look, like he couldn't believe I wasn't rushing to Jess's side. He said something about how everyone makes mistakes, and that it would be good for both me and Jess to make peace. Now, this is where I might have gone a little overboard. I was already pissed off that they were trying to guilt trip me into caring about Jess, but when Tom started in with that everyone makes mistakes bullshit, I lost it. I told them that Jess could rot in that hospital bed for all I cared. I know, harsh, but it's how I felt in the moment. I reminded them that she was the one who cheated, not me. I didn't owe her anything, especially not forgiveness, and I certainly wasn't going to go pretend to care about her just because she had an accident. Then I threw in the fact that they always defended her, even when they knew she was in the wrong. They always made excuses for her, like her cheating was somehow my fault. By this point, Susan was crying, and Tom just shook his head at me like I was the bad guy in all of this. They tried to say some more stuff, but I wasn't interested. I just walked away, leaving them standing there in the middle of the grocery store. Later that night, I got a call from my dad. Turns out, Jess's parents had reached out to my family to complain about how cold I had been to them. My dad was on their side, saying I should have just visited Jess to be the bigger person. My sister agreed, but my mom, thank God, was the only one who actually backed me up. She said I didn't owe Jess anything, and she was right. Still, it turned into this big family argument. Some of my friends even got involved, giving me their 2 cents. Some thought I was being too harsh. Others thought I was completely justified. And honestly, I didn't care what anyone thought. I wasn't going to feel bad for not rushing to Jess's side like some knight in shining armor. She made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Jess is in the hospital, her parents are mad at me, and my own family is split down the middle over whether or not I should have visited her. But you know what? I'm not losing sleep over it. She's not my problem anymore. Update 1. So, after that whole mess with Jess's parents, I thought things would calm down. Like, I wasn't expecting any more drama. But clearly I was wrong. Because a few days later, I got a text from my sister Emma. It was one of those messages that you just know is going to lead to more crap. She said we needed to talk about what happened with Jess, and that she wanted to come over. Now, I wasn't really in the mood to deal with more lectures about how I should have handled things differently, but Emma's my sister and we're pretty close, so I agreed. I figured she just wanted to give her opinion and get it off her chest. No big deal, right? Well, wrong again. Emma shows up at my place, and before I can even offer her a drink, she's already diving into the whole Jess situation. She starts off by saying she understands why I'm angry, but then she goes into this whole thing about how I should have visited Jess in the hospital just to get closure. Closure? I had my closure 3 years ago when we signed the damn divorce papers. I told Emma straight up that I wasn't going to pretend to care about someone who betrayed me like that. I mean, why would I? Jess was in my past, and that's where I wanted her to stay. But Emma kept pushing, saying stuff like, what if it was your last chance to say something to her? Or, what if something worse happened to her? I could feel myself getting more and more frustrated. It's like everyone just forgot what Jess did to me. She wasn't some innocent victim who needed my sympathy. She was the one who wrecked our marriage. So, I asked Emma flat out, if someone did to you what Jess did to me, would you be running to their bedside? Emma went quiet for a minute, and I thought maybe I got through to her. But then she hit me with, it's not the same though. You guys were married. You shared a life together. And honestly, that was it for me. I was done with the conversation. I told her I didn't want to hear about Jess anymore and that I wasn't changing my mind. Jess could deal with her problems on her own. Emma wasn't happy with that, but she eventually dropped it and changed the subject. We talked about other stuff, work, family, whatever. But you could feel this weird tension in the air. It was like she was still thinking about the whole Jess thing, even though we weren't talking about it anymore. After she left, I felt this weird mix of anger and confusion. I mean, why was everyone so caught up on me visiting Jess? I didn't owe her anything. She cheated on me, and I moved on. Simple as that. But it seemed like everyone else just couldn't let it go. A couple days later, I found out why. I get a call from my dad, and he's pissed. Like, I could tell from his voice that this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. He says we need to talk, and he's on his way over. Now, this was weird for my dad. He's not the kind of guy who just shows up unannounced, so I knew something was up. When he gets to my place, he's fuming. He doesn't even sit down before he starts laying into me about how I disrespected Jess's parents and how I should have at least shown some decency by visiting her in the hospital. He goes on about how he raised me better than this, and how disappointed he is in me for being cold-hearted. At this point, I'm just standing there, dumbfounded. Like, what the hell is going on? Why is everyone acting like I'm the bad guy here? So I try to explain my side, but my dad's not having it. He keeps saying that family is important, and that I should have done the right thing. And that's when it clicked. It wasn't just about Jess. It was about my dad's past. Stuff I didn't even know about. See, during this whole rant, he let something slip that I never expected. Apparently, back when my parents first got married, my mom had cheated on him. I had no idea. This was news to me. And now, suddenly, everything made sense. Why my dad was so insistent on me forgiving Jess. Why he was so pissed that I wouldn't go visit her. He was projecting his own shit onto me. I remember standing there, just staring at my dad, trying to process what he'd just said. My mom had cheated on him? My dad, the guy who had always been the family man, had gone through something similar to what I did, and he stayed with her? That's when I lost it. I didn't yell or anything, but I was just so damn frustrated. I told him straight up, I'm not you. I'm not going to forgive Jess just because you forgave Mom. And he didn't like that at all. He got real quiet for a minute, and then he just said, "You don't understand, it's not that simple." But here's the thing. It was that simple for me. Jess cheated. I wasn't going to forgive her. End of story. We went back and forth for a while, and it ended with my dad storming out of my place. We didn't exactly leave things on good terms, and honestly, I didn't know how to feel about it. On one hand, I understood why my dad felt the way he did. He'd been through his own shit, and I guess he thought that if he could forgive my mom, I should be able to forgive Jess. But on the other hand, I wasn't him. I wasn't going to let what she did slide just because he made peace with his own situation. The rest of that week was awkward. My dad didn't call, and I didn't reach out either. I figured we both needed some space. But the whole thing left me feeling weird. Like my whole perspective on my parents' marriage had just been flipped upside down. I kept wondering if I should talk to my mom about it, but at the same time, I didn't want to stir up more drama. A few days later, I got another text from Emma saying I should talk to Dad and make things right. But I wasn't ready for that. I needed to process everything first. I mean, it's not every day you find out your mom cheated on your dad and that your dad stayed with her for decades without you ever knowing. It messed with my head, big time. So that's where things are at now. My family's a mess. Jess is still in the hospital, as far as I know, and I'm just trying to figure out how to deal with everything. All I know for sure is that I'm not going back to that life. Jess can stay in the past, and I'll keep moving forward, whether my family likes it or not. Update 2. All right, let's get into what happened next. So, after the whole argument with my dad, things were pretty tense. We didn't talk for a few weeks, which wasn't normal for us. Like, I'd always been close with my dad, so this silent treatment thing was new territory. My sister Emma kept texting me, trying to play peacemaker, but I just wasn't ready. I needed space to figure things out, especially with all this crap I learned about my parents' past. Anyway, one night, I'm sitting at home, just watching TV, trying to unwind, when my phone buzzes. It's from a number I don't recognize, but it's late, so I'm curious. I pick it up, and guess who it is? Jess. Yeah, out of nowhere. I don't even know how she got my new number, because I'd changed it right after the divorce. But there she was, texting me like it was normal. The message wasn't long, just a simple, "Can we talk?" Like, seriously? After 3 years of no contact, she just pops back into my life with a "can we talk?" like we're old friends catching up. At first, I didn't even respond. I just sat there staring at my phone, debating whether I should just block her and move on. But curiosity got the better of me, and I texted back, "What do you want?" It didn't take long for her to reply. She said she wanted to clear the air, that she'd been doing a lot of thinking since the accident, and that she needed to apologize properly. I wasn't buying it. I mean, she had 3 years to reach out and apologize, and now she decides it's time, right after her parents tried to guilt trip me at the grocery store? Yeah, no thanks. So I told her straight up, "There's nothing to talk about. We're done." I figured that would be the end of it, but Jess wasn't letting it go. She kept texting, saying she had things she needed to explain, that she was sorry for what happened and just wanted me to hear her out. Honestly, part of me was tempted. I wanted to know what she thought she could say to make up for what she did. But at the same time, I knew nothing she said would change anything. So I didn't reply after that. I figured ignoring her was the best way to move on, but of course, that's not where this ends. The next day I get another text, but this time, it's from Emma. She tells me that Jess had reached out to her too, and that she was trying to make amends with everyone. Apparently, Jess had been going through some kind of life-changing moment after the accident, and now she wanted to fix all the things she screwed up. Emma, being Emma, thought I should give Jess a chance to explain herself. She kept saying, "What's the harm in hearing her out?" But I wasn't about to let Jess weasel her way back into my life just because she had a near-death experience. I told Emma to stay out of it, that it was between me and Jess, and that I wasn't interested in rehashing the past. Things were pretty quiet after that. A few days went by and I didn't hear from Jess again, so I figured she finally got the message. But just when I thought it was over, I got a call. This time from my mom. Now you gotta understand, my mom doesn't usually call me unless something serious is going on. We're not the type of family that checks in with daily phone calls or anything like that. So when I saw her name pop up on my screen, I knew something was up. I answered, and right off the bat she says, "We need to talk about Jess." I was already exhausted just hearing her say that. It felt like no matter how hard I tried to leave this chapter of my life behind, everyone was determined to drag me back into it. Turns out, Jess had reached out to my mom. Yeah, she went there. I guess she figured if she couldn't get through to me directly, she'd try going through my family. And in classic Jess fashion, she managed to manipulate my mom into thinking she was some sort of victim in all this. My mom started talking about how Jess had been through a lot since the accident, and how she'd changed, how she was genuinely sorry and just wanted to talk to me. I couldn't believe it. I told my mom flat out that I didn't care how much Jess had changed. It didn't change what she did to me. But my mom wouldn't drop it. She kept saying things like, people can grow, and it wouldn't hurt you to hear her side. I was getting more and more frustrated. It's like no one in my family understood how much Jess's betrayal messed me up. They all acted like it was this small thing I should just get over. But it wasn't small to me. It was my whole damn life that got turned upside down because of her. After a while, I just told my mom I didn't want to talk about Jess anymore. I wasn't going to visit her, I wasn't going to talk to her, and I wasn't going to let her back into my life. I thought that was the end of it, but my mom hit me with something that stopped me in my tracks. Jess is dying. Yeah, that's what she said. Apparently, Jess's injuries from the accident were worse than I'd realized. She was still in the hospital, and according to my mom, the doctors didn't think she had much time left. My mom said that's why Jess was so desperate to talk to me, because she wanted to make things right before it was too late. Now I don't know how to describe what I felt in that moment. It wasn't sadness, but it wasn't relief either. It was this weird mix of emotions that I wasn't ready to deal with. On one hand, part of me thought, well, that's karma, I guess. But on the other hand, it felt heavy, like this person who'd once been such a huge part of my life was about to die, and here I was, refusing to even acknowledge her existence. I didn't know what to say to my mom. I just kind of sat there, letting it sink in. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how I felt about all of it. After a long pause, I finally said, I'll think about it. And that's where I left things. I didn't make any promises, but I didn't shut it down completely either. I guess I needed some time to process everything. So now, here I am, stuck in this weird place of not knowing what to do. Do I visit Jess and give her the closure she's apparently looking for, or do I stick to my guns and keep her out of my life, even if she doesn't have much time left? I don't know, man. It's a lot to think about, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. Part of me feels like I'd be doing the right thing by giving her a chance to apologize, but another part of me just can't shake the anger and betrayal. I guess we'll see what happens next. Update 3. Alright, so here's what went down after that whole mess. I spent a few days just sitting with it, trying to figure out what to do. I kept thinking about what my mom said, about Jess dying and how this might be my last chance to talk to her. It was weighing on me, but not in the way you'd expect. It's not like I suddenly felt bad for her or anything, but it's hard to explain. I guess I was just stuck in my own head, going back and forth on whether I should give her that closure she was asking for. One night I couldn't sleep, so I went for a drive. It's something I do when I'm stressed, just driving aimlessly until my brain quiets down. I ended up parking in front of the hospital where Jess was staying. I didn't even plan on going there. It just kind of happened. I sat there in my car, staring at the entrance, debating whether to go in or just leave. Part of me wanted to get it over with, and another part was like, why the hell are you even here? I sat there for probably an hour, maybe more, just thinking about all the crap she put me through. Every lie, every time she went behind my back, all the begging during the divorce, trying to get me to forgive her. And now she wanted me to show up at her bedside like none of that happened? It didn't feel right. But still, there I was, in the parking lot of the hospital at 2 in the morning, thinking about walking in there and talking to her. Eventually, I said, screw it. I got out of the car and went inside. I wasn't even sure if they'd let me in, considering the time, but the nurse at the front desk was cool about it. She pointed me in the direction of Jess's room, and before I knew it, I was standing outside her door. I didn't go in right away. I stood there, staring at the door, my hand on the handle, trying to convince myself to walk through it. Part of me still wanted to turn around and leave, but I'd come this far, and I figured I might as well see it through. When I finally opened the door, Jess was lying in bed, hooked up to all these machines. She looked different, not just because of the accident or the fact that she was sick, but something else. She looked tired, worn out, like the years had taken more from her than I'd realized. It was strange seeing her like that after all this time. She didn't notice me at first. She was staring out the window, lost in her own thoughts. When she finally saw me, her eyes widened, like she couldn't believe I actually showed up. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other in silence. I didn't know what to say, and I think she was too shocked to speak. Eventually, she broke the silence. I didn't think you'd come, she said, her voice soft, like she was struggling to get the words out. I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Yeah, well, here I am. There was another long pause, and then Jess started to cry. Not the dramatic, attention-seeking kind of crying she used to do back when we were together, but something different. It was quieter, more real. It caught me off guard because honestly, I didn't expect her to have any real emotions left for me. I'm sorry, she said, her voice shaking. I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that. I just stood there, not really knowing how to respond. I mean, what do you even say to that? I wasn't about to tell her everything was okay because it wasn't. But at the same time, I wasn't there to tear her apart either. I don't know what you want me to say, I finally replied. You broke my trust. You broke us. That's not something you can just apologize for and expect it to go away. Jess nodded, still crying. I know, she whispered. I know I hurt you. I was selfish and stupid, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I'm sorry for everything. For ruining what we had, for not being the person you deserved. Hearing her say that was weird. Part of me felt like I should be angry, but I wasn't. I wasn't angry anymore. Maybe I'd been angry for so long that I just ran out of it, you know? I was still hurt, still carrying that weight around, but the rage I used to feel wasn't there anymore. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized how much time had passed, how much we'd both changed, and in that moment, I realized something. Closure wasn't about her. It was about me. I'd been holding on to this anger for years, thinking it was protecting me, but really it was just keeping me stuck in the past. And maybe seeing Jess like this, so vulnerable and broken, made me realize that. I don't hate you anymore, I said, surprising even myself with how calm I sounded. But I'm never going to forget what you did. Jess nodded again, tears still streaming down her face. I wouldn't expect you to. We sat there in silence for a while after that. I didn't really know what else to say, and I think Jess was too drained to keep talking. There was this strange sense of finality in the air, like we both knew this was the last time we'd ever see each other. After a while, I stood up to leave. Jess looked up at me, her eyes still red and puffy from crying, and said, "Thank you for coming. It means more to me than you know." I didn't say anything back. I just nodded and walked out of the room. As I made my way back to my car, I felt this weird sense of relief. It wasn't like I forgave her, but I didn't feel as weighed down anymore. Like, maybe that chapter of my life was finally over, for real this time. I got in my car, sat there for a minute, and took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, it felt like I could finally move on. And you know what? That felt pretty damn good.
At Falcon Tech Industries, Monday mornings usually meant deadlines and coffee-fueled hustle. But this Monday was different. A mysterious figure rolled into the sleek glass lobby in a wheelchair, his sharp blue suit and calm demeanor commanding quiet curiosity. The man was Robert King, Falcon Tech's new CEO, but he had no intention of announcing himself. Instead, he had made a bold decision to walk, or rather, roll, into his company unnoticed, to see its true colors. Meanwhile, Susan, the headstrong HR manager, strode through the office with her usual air of superiority. She wasn't one for second chances, especially not for those she deemed beneath her. Without hesitation, she spotted the man in the wheelchair and immediately approached, her voice dripping with condescension. "This area is for employees only," she snapped. But Robert's steady gaze didn't waver, and for a brief moment, her words hung in the air, unanswered. What Susan didn't know, and couldn't imagine, was that her careless assumptions were about to unravel her career in front of the entire office. The channel Real Life Stories New invites you to witness a story of justice, transformation, and the power of unexpected truths. What will happen when the woman who enforces workplace rules finds herself at the mercy of one she just dismissed? Keep watching to find out. Susan's heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she scanned the office, her sharp gaze darting between employees. Her reputation as a strict HR manager had been earned through years of dismissive comments, cold stares, and decisions that left no room for empathy. Today, however, she had no idea her actions would come under the spotlight in ways she never anticipated. When she first saw the man in the wheelchair near the lobby, her annoyance flared instantly. He didn't belong, at least not in her carefully managed version of Falcon Tech. Striding toward him with her practiced authority, she ignored his confident posture and the sharpness of his tailored blue suit. "Excuse me," she said curtly, tilting her head just enough to appear both impatient and condescending. "This area is for employees only. Let me help you find the way out." Robert King, calm and composed, tilted his head slightly. His gaze locked on Susan, measuring her every word and movement. "Actually," he said evenly, "I'm exactly where I need to be." The air between them grew tense, but Susan either didn't notice or didn't care. Her lips twisted into a faint, dismissive smile as she crossed her arms. "I don't know how you managed to get past security, but this is a private space. You can't just..." Before she could finish, a voice cut through the tension. "Susan. What are you doing?" Emma, the regional manager, approached in a near panic, her face pale. Unlike Susan, Emma knew exactly who this man was. She had been briefed on the CEO's unconventional plan, and the realization of what was unfolding in front of her made her stomach drop. "What am I doing?" Susan replied, her tone sharp and defensive. "I'm dealing with someone who doesn't belong here." Emma's voice cracked as she blurted, "That's Mr. Robert King. He's our new CEO." The words landed like a thunderclap. For a moment, the bustling office seemed to freeze. Employees nearby stopped in their tracks, some whispering, others wide-eyed, as they turned to watch the drama unfold. Susan's confident expression faltered, replaced by a growing pallor. Her arms dropped stiffly to her sides as her mind raced to process the humiliation sinking in. Robert leaned forward slightly in his wheelchair, his expression unreadable but his presence undeniable. His voice, steady and razor-sharp, cut through the silence. "It's interesting," he began, his words deliberate and calm, "how people reveal themselves when they think no one's watching. Respect isn't just a company policy, it's a necessity. And it seems you've forgotten that." Susan's hands fumbled as she tried to muster a response. I didn't mean," she stammered, her voice faltering under the weight of his unwavering gaze. But it was too late. The whispers around her grew louder, and the judgment in the eyes of her coworkers was impossible to ignore. Emma, still standing nearby, looked on with a mix of relief and dread. While Susan's arrogance had long been a source of tension in the office, witnessing her downfall so publicly was a reminder of how fragile power can be when built on fear and prejudice. As Robert addressed the gathered employees, his calm authority turned into a rallying call. "This company is built on innovation," he said, scanning the room, "but innovation means nothing without inclusivity. Discrimination, of any kind, will never have a place here. Change starts now." The employees erupted into applause, their faces lighting up with a renewed sense of hope. Meanwhile, Susan stood frozen, her world crumbling as the weight of her actions, and their consequences, became undeniable. Each moment was a reminder that the path she had taken, one paved with arrogance and disregard for others, had led her here. And there was no turning back. As the applause subsided and the room grew quiet again, Robert King took a final moment to look out at his team. The tension that had gripped the office just minutes ago had been replaced with a sense of hope and possibility. "This isn't just about one person," Robert said, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "It's about who we are as a company, and as individuals. Every one of us deserves respect, and every one of us has the responsibility to give it." The employees exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking introspective. Susan, meanwhile, stood near the corner, her earlier confidence replaced with visible regret. She had spent years tearing others down, but for the first time, she seemed to grasp the weight of her actions. It was too late to undo the harm, but the lesson was undeniable: power used to belittle others ultimately crumbles under its own weight. As Robert wheeled out of the meeting room, his presence left a ripple of change behind him. Emma, the regional manager, felt a renewed determination to lead with compassion. The employees, inspired by Robert's words, carried a new energy as they returned to their desks, eager to build something greater together. Falcon Tech had always been a leader in innovation, but now, it was poised to become a leader in integrity as well. Later that evening, as the office lights dimmed and employees packed up for the day, Robert remained in his office. His actions had sent a clear message, but his work was far from over. For Robert, creating a culture of respect wasn't about a single moment, it was about consistency, day after day. This story isn't just about Falcon Tech. It's a reminder for all of us to stand up against prejudice and treat every individual with dignity, no matter their role or appearance. If you've ever seen or experienced a moment when justice prevailed, share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and help Real Life Stories New reach 10,000 subscribers. Together, we can inspire change, one story at a time. Jordan Walker stood in front of Urban Luxe, his flagship store, clutching a plain cardboard box marked Samples. Dressed in worn jeans and a hoodie, he looked like just another delivery driver navigating the bustling streets of Manhattan. But inside, his heart raced, not with nerves, but with purpose. Today, Jordan wasn't just delivering samples. He was delivering a test. A decision he made on impulse, yet one he hoped would reveal the truth about how his employees treated people they deemed unimportant. Stepping through the sleek glass doors, Jordan was immediately greeted by the polished interiors that symbolized the success of his luxury brand. Yet, what unfolded inside wasn't the warm professionalism he had built his company on, it was a chilling glimpse of arrogance and prejudice. Two sales associates, Mark and Rachel, barely looked at him before making biting comments, their laughter cutting through the air like a blade. "Wrong door," Mark sneered, while Rachel added with a smirk, "This isn't your kind of store." What they didn't know. The man they were mocking was their boss, and he wasn't about to